Welcome to the Center for Civil Society seminar series on campaigns you need to know about. My name is Danford Tivongodze. I'm a researcher based here at the Center for Civil Society. I also facilitate seminars at the Center for Civil Society. Today, we are hosting Mark from the Union Against Hunger, who will give a seminar titled "Why Fighting for the Right to Sufficient Nutritious Food is Now Every Activist Business, Building the Union Against Hunger." We are so happy to have you at the CCS, Mark. We are looking forward to learning more about the Union Against Hunger, your campaigns, your advocacy, your ideologies. We are hoping to learn more. To introduce Mark Haywood to the audience, Mark Haywood is a South African social justice activist. He was formerly the executive director and co-founder of Section 27, as well as a co-founder of the Treatment Action Campaign, TAC. He sits on the board of several health and human rights NGOs in South Africa and internationally. Mark, I will give you 10 minutes to tell us more about the Union Against Hunger's work. Then after that, we'll have a question and answer session where I'll ask Mark to engage with the audience. May the audience keep their mics on mute, please. And also videos, if you could shut your videos, we would appreciate it. Thank you again, Mark, for making time to come and talk to us about what you're doing there at the Union Against Hunger. Thank you so much, Mark. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Danford, and thank you, colleagues from the Center for Civil Society, for holding this important seminar series, and also for the invitation today to just speak about a movement that we are building to try to end what we call the crime of hunger in South Africa. I titled this presentation "Every Activist's Business," addressing hunger, because perhaps more than any other issue, hunger cuts across all social justice questions. As I said in the blurb that accompanies the promotion for this webinar, hunger is a gender issue, hunger is a women's issue, hunger is a children's issue, hunger is a trade union issue, hunger is a poverty issue, hunger is a climate crisis issue, and hunger is an education issue, hunger is a health issue. And if we can focus our efforts on ending hunger in South Africa and ending malnutrition in South Africa, if we can concentrate our efforts, every one of those other social justice issues stands to benefit. So in a sense, my opening appeal is for us to march together and to strike together on the issue of hunger and the right to sufficient food. So I'm going to make this presentation in 4 parts. In the first part, I just want to talk about the state of hunger in our country, and what are the causes, what are the drivers of hunger. Many of you, I think, will be familiar with the facts, but I'm going to state some of the facts because they are shocking, and I hope that they will kind of add to the urgency of this discussion and the urgency of action. The second part will talk about...
Just a minute. Just
Yep.
a minute, Mark.
Yeah.
Simo, can you please project, because we can't see the slides on our side? Simo?
I'll keep talking, Danford, while the slides are useful but not essential. So shall I continue?
Okay, now you can continue, it's fine.
In the second part, I want to talk about what is the Union Against Hunger, why we formed the Union Against Hunger about 14 months ago, and the progress in building a movement around hunger. In the third part, I want to discuss with colleagues the current strategies of the Union Against Hunger. There are 4 or 5 main strategies. And finally, I want to finish by talking about action, and in particular about plans that we have for World Hunger Day, which is taking place a week tomorrow on the 28th of May, and where the Union Against Hunger is planning a major social mobilization to draw attention to hunger. So let me just start, Simo, if you can put to the second slide, by talking about the state of hunger in our country. You know, it is shocking that South Africa is a country that grows enough food for all of its people, that has an agricultural surplus, that has an advanced food system, complicated food system, formal and informal, but nonetheless an advanced food system. And yet, in spite of all that, we are a country where up to a third of our people face hunger on a regular basis. The numbers are that up to 20 million people, approximately 25%, live on a spectrum of food vulnerability. Some people who have no food all the time, the millions of people, for example, who live on the social relief of distress grant and who struggle on a daily basis to obtain food, and some people who live with insufficient food, in particular insufficient nutritious food all of the time because of issues of affordability, and some people who experience hunger on a seasonal or a monthly basis when low salaries run out, or when work that is to do with farm work or other forms of seasonal work cease. The figures speak for themselves, but I will mention them. 10, actually closer to 11,000 children who die a year in South Africa. That's 30 children a day who are dying related to severe acute malnutrition, or to malnutrition, to diseases where malnutrition is the underlying cause. That's 30 child deaths, young child deaths a day. The flip side, I mean, the malnutrition deaths is the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the deaths and the severe disease is a crisis of stunting of children, where we now have a situation where 29% of children by the age of 5 are stunted, meaning that they are physically less developed, cognitively less developed, and in most instances that stunting will carry through into adult life and will affect that child's and then that adult's opportunity. So there's an example, for example, of just how the connection, the intersection between hunger and poverty and later inequality in life. There are other aspects of the food crisis. We have a rapidly growing obesity epidemic, again, amongst young children, but not limited to young children, where obesity is driven by malnutrition and by the fact that the food that is accessible and that is affordable is not good food, but is food that is high in sugar, high in carbohydrate, high in salt. So there are many, many dimensions to the hunger crisis, and I could continue to give further facts and statistics. But the bottom line is that we have a hunger and nutrition crisis, and it plays out along the lines of class. And as you can see from this first slide, it also plays out along the historic lines, legacy lines of race. If we can move to the next slide, well, what are the causes of hunger? The causes, there are several major drivers of hunger and malnutrition, but obviously a major factor is inequality and poverty. It is the fact that food is treated as a commodity, not as a right, that food is excessively priced, mainly in the formal food sector, and that the excessive pricing of food places essential foodstuffs beyond the reach of people who are poor in our country. And this is what I've shown here on this slide is actually the front page of the Citizen from last Friday. And if the Citizen of all papers is focusing on the exploitation and excessive pricing of food, then we know that there is a problem. We have a large informal food sector, as colleagues and comrades know, but the informal food sector is unsupported, faces problems about how to store food, location, attacks on informal traders, etc. Of course, price isn't the only factor that is driving food. There are factors such as access to land, the growing climate crisis that exists in our country, and a number of other social and economic factors that impact on people's access to sufficient food. But in the time that I have today, I just need to draw attention to what are the major drivers. And the final thing I want to say in this opening section is, well, what is the response to hunger? And this is why we decided to create the Union Against Hunger a year ago, is that the response to the hunger crisis is wholly insufficient. The corporate sector thinks that it is doing enough through its corporate social investment programs to tackle hunger. In fact, just 2 days ago, we got another letter from ShopRite Checkers indicating that they see no need to meet with the Union Against Hunger because they've told us that they're doing enough through the CSI that they spend. I mean, it's a bit like philanthropy generally. It creates the problem and then pretends to be the savior when it gives a few philanthropic scrapings off the table in terms of funding to a food kitchen here and there, funding to a food program here and there. But as bad as the failures of the corporate sector is the failure of government. And here, what we point out as the Union Against Hunger and the center of much of our organizing is that Section 27 of the Constitution talks about the right of everyone to sufficient food and water, and it talks about the duty of the state to take reasonable legislative and other measures to progressively realize the right to sufficient food. Now, the problem that we have in this country is that there is no coordination around the food crisis. Responsibility for food and agriculture or food is spread across about 8 different government departments who do not talk to each other, and there is no political prioritization. There is no political will to address the hunger crisis. And I'll come back to this in a few minutes' time. But again, the lack of political will is evident in the fact that the main policy to address hunger and food security is meant to be something called the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy. The last one expired, I think, in 2022. There is a draft National Food Security and Nutrition Policy that civil society has had input into, but we heard 2 days ago that that draft is not expected to be finalized until the first quarter of 2027. So in the midst of a of a drastic food crisis, there is political paralysis, there is profiteering, and the food crisis gets worse and worse, as again you'll be evident through the connection with rising fuel prices, the crisis caused by the American invasion or the American war on Iran, and so on and so on. So the bottom line is that this is yet another instance of unconstitutional state failure, and the failure of the state to use its powers under the Constitution to regulate the food market in various ways, including by price caps and by price controls, to ensure greater affordability, at least of foods that are needed by children for their growth and development in a critical early stage of child development. Next slide, please. The next slide, well, I don't really, Simo, if you can get it onto the next slide. So comrades, that is just a cartoon depiction of what some of the factors that are involved in food insecurity and hunger in our country. Next slide. I want to talk now about, in the second section, about what it is that's led to the formation of the Union Against Hunger. And this is where civil society becomes very important. We have in our country numerous civil society organizations that are doing excellent work in different aspects of the hunger crisis, whether it's movements around food sovereignty, such as the Food Sovereignty Campaign, or whether it's the Institute for Economic Justice, or whether it's the food kitchens that are being organized, or people who are working on policy issues and research issues in relation to food security and hunger. The problem is that these organizations up to now have not worked effectively together and have not been able to pool and build power on this issue on this issue in relation to food, so that we can shift the political and economic needle, and so that we can actually contest corporate power over the food system. So in February 2026, we launched the Union Against Hunger, initially with a small group of organizations that came together to form the Union Against Hunger. Those organizations included the Center of Excellence in Food Security, Grow Great, the Healthy Living Alliance, Abahlali Basem Jondolo joined later on. The Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation was part of the original groups. But the objective was to build what comrades in Abahlali call a movement of movements, a mass movement in some ways modeled on the treatment action campaign that could give voice to the real experience of hunger in communities, that could give power to people in communities, and that could sharpen the issue of access to food as a political priority in this country. So the plan was to try to build a movement that would draw together faith-based organizations, trade unions, civil society organizations, social movements, and so on and so on. The objectives of the Union Against Hunger can be found on our website, which is www.unionagainsthunger.org. But essentially, the objectives are to end hunger and to end hunger sooner than later. We work together to create a set of what we call 10 demands, again, which can be found on the website, but which again pool issues to do with malnutrition and hunger into a set of simple and straightforward demands that can be made on government and that can be made on the corporate sector. Since we launched the Union Against Hunger about a year ago, I think we have begun to build an embryonic movement around these issues. Today, the Union Against Hunger has the support of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, the Food and Allied Workers Union, Abahlali Basim Jondolo, approximately 60 non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations, but equally importantly, has support in communities and in community organizations, in informal settlements and in townships. Just today, for example, the Union Against Hunger was launched in Mahikeng at a meeting that took place in the Northwest. So we're beginning to see a growing movement, and everywhere where we raise the need for organization and social mobilization around food, everybody agrees and everybody has ideas about strategies about how that can be achieved. Structurally, at the moment, the Union Against Hunger works. Obviously, it's a young movement, but we have a secretariat which is made up of the founding members that I've already listed. But side by side with the secretariat, we have a steering committee of the Union Against Hunger, which is made up of about 25 different organizations, diverse organizations, and which has responsibility for the overall strategy and social and political mobilization that the Union Against Hunger is involved in undertaking. We are trying to build branches at a community level, but we are very serious that we do not intend to duplicate or replicate work that is already being done by other organizations working on food. So it's more a question of other organizations aligning with the Union Against Hunger, using the logo and the brand of the Union Against Hunger, and mobilizing jointly around key campaigns than setting up and creating duplication of structures. It's a work in progress, and we are learning as we go on these issues and improving and refining as we build this movement. Turning now to the last two sections, Simo, if you could just move the slides. The slides aren't perfect in terms of what I'm trying to say, but they give you a sense of what I'm saying. I want to talk now about the four major strategies that the Union Against Hunger is pursuing. And those four strategies is currently pursuing. Those four strategies are around the South African Human Rights Commission and the hunger hearings being organized by the South African Human Rights Commission, the campaign for affordable food prices that is targeting ShopRite, the campaign to address food insecurity and malnutrition amongst children, the campaign for a national food and nutrition security plan, and finally, work that we are trying to undertake on building what we call food literacy and food power at a community level. So let me start just quickly with the Human Rights Commission. Throughout 2025, we worked behind the scenes trying to persuade the Human Rights Commission to see that access to food is a major human rights issue, and an issue on which the Human Rights Commission could take action. After working closely together, the Human Rights Commission agreed to hold a national inquiry into food systems in South Africa. And that national inquiry commenced in March this year with 7 days of public hearings that were held at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, where I can't quite remember the number, but probably about 30 or 40 different organizations came and presented evidence to the Human Rights Commission about the crisis of hunger and the drivers of hunger. Those hearings are continuing from July the 6th to 10th this year. And when the hearings resume in July, they will be hearing submissions from ShopRite, from the big food retailers, from the big food manufacturers, and from critical government departments. Of course, we will be mobilizing around those hearings. We will be protesting at those hearings. And we have already, I think, caused the Human Rights Commission to use their subpoena powers to force the big retailers to attend. So the Human Rights Commission hearings are a way of getting much more public awareness. They're a way of getting accountability. And ultimately, the intention of the Union Against Hunger is to ensure that the Human Rights Commission comes out with strong recommendations about what government must do and what the corporate sector must do in order to address the hunger crisis that exists in the country. The second thing that I want to talk about is our campaign targeting ShopRite. People often ask, why are we targeting ShopRite and why not others like Pick n Pay, like Spar, like Woolworths? We don't only target ShopRite, but there's a particular reason for focusing on ShopRite, and that is that the ShopRite has the largest footprint amongst consumers who are poor or who have no income. It is the worst profiteer from food. They made about 7 billion rand. I'll have to check that figure again in profits. Their CEO is paid 87 million rand a year, Peter Engelbrecht, and their rate of profit is twice the average of profits that are made by food retailers globally. They also pay their workers and the people who work in ShopRite the lowest level of most companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So the reason for targeting ShopRite is to focus on profiteering from food, but to put pressure on the whole industry to reduce profits, to reduce prices, and on government to take action. We have had a petition against ShopRite. We have had protests against ShopRite. We persuaded ShopRite to meet with us last year, but then when they refused to meet a delegation that included Zwelinzima Vavi, we told ShopRite that we would no longer be in a position to meet with them. So the ShopRite campaign continues, and we are about to step it up, as I'll explain in the final parts of this presentation in 2 minutes. The next thing I just want to mention is that we are contemplating litigation, or not contemplating, we've made a decision to institute litigation against the government in terms of its failure to address the crisis of malnutrition amongst young children in particular. And this is an area where we believe that action could quite dramatically and quite quickly lead to lower rates of stunting, lower rates of child death that I've already mentioned. The final two things in terms of strategies is South Africa has to have a national food plan. The national food plan has to have a recognition that we are dealing with a food crisis, and that food crisis is only going to get worse and therefore needs coordinated, concerted measures to ensure access to food. The target at the moment for the campaign around the National Food Plan is the Minister and the Department of Agriculture, because within government, that is the department that has responsibility for coordinating and putting together and finalizing the National Food Plan. And then the last thing is just to say that just as with the Treatment Action Campaign, the power of the Treatment Action Campaign was always the fact that it was built at ground level, that it had strong branches, that there was strong understanding in communities of rights around access to antiretroviral treatment, around access to the healthcare system, and that people understood the treatment system, they understood their treatment, they had power that came from treatment literacy. So the Union Against Hunger is in a fairly advanced stage of developing a food rights literacy program that we will take to communities and we will use to transfer and build knowledge and power at community level around food rights, food systems, malnutrition, what is good food, what is bad food, why people are exploited in pricing, and so on and so on. So those are currently the main strategies that the Union Against Hunger is pursuing. I want to finish, colleagues, just very quickly, as I started by saying, Thursday, the 28th of May, is World Hunger Day. The Union Against Hunger and our allies are focusing on World Hunger Day to try to catalyze a broader social mobilization, political mobilization to address the hunger crisis. So next week, we are starting by organizing a press conference in Johannesburg on Tuesday. We have confirmed speakers at the press conference: Sbu Zikode from Abahlali, Zwelinzima Vavi, the South African Council of Churches, the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, and so on and so on. We're going to use that press conference to announce these new campaigns that I've been talking to you about. On Wednesday, on Wednesday the 27th, we're organizing a national day of action with pickets against Shoprite. At the moment, in 28 different Shoprites across the country. Those will be short pickets for about an hour, which will be used really as a mobilizing tool to talk to people going into Shoprite and to put pressure on Shoprite and to send a signal to the bosses that this campaign is not going to go away. Today, the Food and Allied Workers Union has issued a press statement supporting the Shoprite campaign and making a demand that every worker in Shoprite should get a monthly food voucher of 3,000 Rand on top of wages to compensate for rising food prices. So that's going to be an interesting new dimension to that campaign. Of course, it's entirely affordable for Shoprite because Shoprite makes billions of rands in profit and spends about 450 million Rand a year on corporate social investment. So if they can spend 450 million Rand a year on corporate social investment, they can and should afford to make it possible for their people who work in Shoprite to afford decent food. Also on Wednesday, we're organizing a meeting in Johannesburg with the Justice Jody Collipan of the Constitutional Court to talk about the right to food and what it means and what it doesn't. On Thursday morning, World Food Day itself, we have a meeting where we intend to grill the Department of Social Development in Gauteng. But most importantly, at lunchtime, we will be organizing a picket of the Department of Agriculture and John Steenhuisen to demand the National Food and Nutrition Security Plan. We're also working on World Hunger Day to provide food, a cooked meal to people living in an informal settlement in Tshwane called Plastic City. So, comrades, that's I've talked very fast, and there are 20 slides, but I've only shown you 4 or 5 of them. But I want to just conclude, as I started, by saying access to sufficient quality, nutritious food is possible. The solutions exist. It is affordable if you take away profiteering. It is an issue on which civil society could unite. It is an issue on which we could win. And if we could win, it is an issue which would build a sense of power and will amongst poor people, amongst social movements that could be carried forward into fighting on other social justice issues. So this movement has wind in its sails. It's got a long way to go still. It's not perfect. We're learning as we go along, but we intend to change the face of hunger in this country. I'm sorry that I spoke 8 minutes over time. I'll stop there. Thanks, Comrade Danford.